All right. Welcome back. MisFitNation. If you're a veteran and you're struggling, or feel like you are leading a path towards the darkness, stop and think about those who are around you. Think about how they truly value you, how they will miss you. You are not alone. You need to talk to someone. Someone will listen to you. If you feel like you'll be a burden to someone or feel embarrassed, call the hotline at 988 and press option 1. Don't make a permanent solution to a temporary problem. If you're a new listener, thanks for joining us. Please subscribe to our show on your favorite podcast apps. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel at _MisFitNation. It's _MisFitNation. This will keep you up to date with all of our latest news, episodes, and of course, the stories of our great guests. Speaking of which, our next guest had a vision to make the world a safer and happier place for his grandchildren to grow up in. So he founded Happy Community Builders, so that community builders everywhere would be able to have the support they need to make communities a happier place for all. So without further ado, let's welcome Barry Braun to the MisFitNation. Welcome, Barry.
Thanks, Rich. That's awesome. Thank you. Glad to be here.
Thanks for, linking in with us and being flexible, because I think we had to reschedule one time before this. Just technical difficulties on my side, thanks to Mother Nature. And we're glad we're here today and able to talk and learn more about you and everything you've done in your life. So if you don't mind, tell us a little more about your story from as far back as you want to go to how we got to the Happy Community Builders now.
Well, I've always been interested in what makes people do what people do. And so I'm not a psychologist, but I am a professional coach, and I've been in leadership positions and sales positions, and all of that has to do with understanding why people do what they do. And so when I got about 10, 12, 11 years ago, to be exact, I started to become a grandfather. My first grandchild, I now have 4 of them. I was wondering what their world would be like, and as they grow up into adulthood. And the picture I built hasn't gotten any brighter over the last 11 years. It's still a troublesome picture. But what I did at that point in time is commit my life to trying to mitigate that outcome, do what I can to make it so that it's not as dire as it might be. And so out of all of that came the idea of happy communities. Happy communities are places where people know each other, they belong with each other, and they care for each other, no matter what their other differences might be. Happy communities aren't totally homogeneous. They have diversity of them in them, diversity in all kinds of ways, wealth, uh, and the normal ones of race and gender and all that sort of stuff. And happy communities are places where all people belong and all people look out for each other. They feel a responsibility to each other. And unfortunately, the trend line over the last 40 years has been that we've been dropping the ball on that. We as citizens have been giving up our responsibility and delegating it off to politicians and businesses and NGOs. And we ourselves have lowered our expectations of ourselves in terms of what we contribute, what our responsibility is to community. And so the Happy Community Builders is about reversing that trend. Happy Community Builders is about gathering the people who care about community, who are working hard to build community and take care of the problems that our communities have, like poverty or racism or whatever it might be, homelessness or whatever it is. Bring them all to in one place where they can support each other and share their expertises with each other, so that they're more effective at being able to do what they do every day, as well as them having an opportunity to rethink their future of what they think community can be. And that's really where I hope the big hope is for me, is that we can rethink where community fits into our society again.
That's outstanding. And I know community was a huge thing. Like when my dad grew up, and even when I grew up in the '70s, you
Yeah,
knew everyone on your block. You knew everyone around you, and you talked to people. You actually went outside, you played, you talked to each other, and you didn't just have your parents that would yell at you. You had everyone's parents that looked
yeah.
out for you and made sure you weren't going on the wrong path. And so you had lots of moms and dads in your neighborhood that would take care of all the kids. And now I think we've kind of splintered away from that, especially in the last 5 to 10 years, and definitely during the last 2 years during the Mr. COVID's reign of terror on people. People don't talk to each other a lot anymore. Do you see that as a burden, I guess, an obstacle to making people grow in that community again? Or is that a way we can pivot and learn a different way to communicate and make communities even stronger?
Well, I see the story being slightly different than the way you told it. I agree with most of what you said, but we've actually been on this trend line since about the 1980s, about 40 years or so. So you're right. In the 70s, neighbors knew neighbors. It took a village to raise a kid still, and the village stood up and raised the kid. Uh, but starting in the 1980s, we got this idea of individualism, that the only person that really matters in the world is me, and I'm responsible for me, and I have to take care of me. And if I'm successful enough, I can buy my way out of any problems. And that's my job in the world, is to be able to be independent and not be dependent on anybody else. And so that's where this idea of community started breaking down. And it didn't all happen all at once, but it's been progressive. And I think what Mr. COVID did to us is actually made us realize how important community was, because for whatever little ties that we still had to community, they were completely broken with Mr. COVID. And we started noticing what we took for granted before, how important community actually is in our life and how interdependent we are really on each other. And so I think coming out of that, there's a big hope, in my own personal experience in the last year or so, is that people are really grabbing onto the idea that they want community back again. They don't necessarily know how to do it, but it's something that they want. Uh,
Definitely. I think I've seen a lot of it just recently here in Tennessee. More people talking to each other face to face instead of
yeah,
doing the launch on each other on Facebook or whatever social media site, and actually going out shaking hands and talking to each other. And shaking hands is like it's bad news to people, but it's still, you can still shake hands. You can wash them later. You'll be all right. And
absolutely.
not gonna kill you, but that helps to look someone in the eye, shake their hand, and say, "Hey, how are you? And what can we do to make this area better?" And I think that's what we lost over, like you said, the 40 years of the breakdown, and it just got progressively worse over those years.
Yeah, and the good news is exactly what you're talking about, is people are longing back for community. They realize their vulnerability in being totally independent, and they're reaching out to each other. And some know how to do that better than others. Some communities know how to do that better than others. Uh, but uh, but I think that's the great hope that we have right now, is uh, that people can are willing to start revisiting the idea that interdependence, community, belonging, caring, all those sort of things are important. So I have a big dream, Rich, and it's related to that. The question that I would like to ask, just for people imagining a future, a different future than where we're at right now, what would happen if every politician, every bureaucrat, every business manager, and every citizen uh, had a responsibility to make decisions for the betterment of their community? What would our world be like if that was the case, right? If because we're passing laws regularly, and often they're destructive for community. They go against the grains of community. Uh, Businesses often come in and disrupt community. uh, uh, rather than contribute to it. The local business people are often the core of the community, but the big community businesses where headquarters are who knows where and who cares, don't really care except how much money they can glean out of the community, and that's disruptive to the community, and citizens have lost a sense of responsibility to actually be, uh, be part, be responsible for the community. We've gotten to this place where we're consumers. Uh, we're consumers of politicians. We politicians are there to serve us, which means that we consume their services. We ourselves don't have any responsibility. So what would happen if that all turned upside down again, and community was number one in amongst all those organizations and peoples? What would our world be like?
And it would be a better dynamic, I believe. Like you said, with the politician thing, if they could see outside their 4 foot box inside their big offices up in the big house and see what communities
Yeah.
actually are doing back where they're from, and understand the problems that are there and the progress that can be made, I think they would do things a lot differently than they do up in their big cushy offices.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think we as citizens would probably do things differently too. Uh, because it's not all the responsibility of politicians for, although that's how we've tried to frame things, as we got things as they should is the number one phrase that we use. But uh, there's a lot of we should in there as well.
I believe there's a lot of I should, then we should. And if we wake up each morning and we start to do things right in our house and then
Yeah,
spread it outside our house, I think that's when that I becomes the we and the team, I guess, comes together and you can build
yeah,
a community and then work your way out. I tell people all the time, I don't worry about what's going on in Washington, D.C., because it really doesn't have a lot to do with me there. It has to do a lot to do with me here. Local politics has more to do with me here. So if you don't vote in the local elections, don't complain about what's going on in your local
yeah.
community. You have to vote in all the elections, not just the big ones that are cool on TV. And that's what gets a lot of people lost in the sauce about the whole social political thing. But you still have to fix your own house first.
Yes, absolutely. Um,
You said earlier
I
that you like to understand why people do things, and that's been from a long time of your life. You said during a lot of your career, you did try to understand why people did things. And why is it hard for people to actually make things easier to be do good things?
Well, here's a really simple way of looking at it, but I think it has a lot of validity. So, you, Rich, and all of each listener out there, and myself personally, we all have a story of who we are, and we act according to that story, right? You act pretty consistently who your story of who Rich is, and I act pretty consistently with the story of who Barry is, and I think that's true for just about everybody out there. Uh, so, but we also have a story that we're caught up in a lot of stories, and we have a story about our community. Our community has a story. My experience is if I ask a half a dozen people in a community, what's the story about this community? I'll start getting a lot of consistency in it. And then people act accordingly. And so we're caught up in these stories. And there's stories at community, there's story at our nation level, our state level, our nation level. And each one of these stories governs how we behave. We act consistently with the story. And so I think a first challenge in that is actually questioning the stories that we're living by. Do we really want this story that we're living under? We don't have to accept the story. We can make up a different story for ourselves, and then we'll act differently. So I think that's the what I've noticed is the biggest driving force for people's behavior is that they're caught up in a story and then they act consistent with the story. And the trick is to recognize this. Most people don't even recognize the story they're caught up in. So the first step is to sit down and just ask yourself, what story is causing me to behave the way I'm behaving? And is that really the story I want to be caught under?
Exactly. It's definitely that's a good way of thinking that way. And I never heard that it put that way, but I believe that is exactly true. How people they build their persona and then they have to live that persona, kind of like
Yeah,
Fonzie and Happy Days. It's the same way.
exactly. Yes. Great metaphor. That's a great example.
We're talking about
Yeah.
community and building that happy community. How do we go out there and inspire others to make that community a better place?
Well, here's what I'm going to tell you a little story first of all. So one of the things that we did with Happy Community is we've developed a process for how whole communities can change their story, and we applied this in several communities, and one of them is a small town called Windsor, Nova Scotia. Its population is around 12,000, including the surrounding area. And before we were started there, the community had a story of nothing ever happens here. We're so divisive. If somebody has an idea, we'll fight over it until we drop the whole idea altogether and nothing ever happens here. That was their story. Uh, 2 years later, uh, that story changed to look at how much is happening here. What a great place to live. Look at our downtowns filled up. People are looking out for each other. Look, that person over there just picked up so and so and helped them out and that sort of thing. What a great place to live. And how did that happen? Well, it started with one person, and one person gathered three other people until there was four and then five people. And those five people started doing things in a particular kind of way that we showed them how to do. And that started gathering first a group of 50, then 150, then 500 people. And when they were done, they had 12 major projects going on in the community that attracted 700 volunteers to keep those projects going. And through that process, the community just naturally changed their story, and then people started behaving differently in it. So it took one person to get it started, though, and that's what our experience is.
One person to inspire. So if you inspire and lead with inspiration, you're
Yeah,
likely to pick up followers and people who want to be inspired by you and to inspire others and pass that motivation around. I think that's a great way to.
yeah, yeah. It's one person who sees a possibility and says, "We have a possibility for a different future than what we're living under." And gathers a small group of people who can believe that possibility with them. And then they start talking the possibility, and then there's other people that show up, and then they start turning that possibility into some sort of action, and people can start seeing that it's more than just a possibility. It starts to become a reality, and then right, and that's how it works.
So we talked about the inspiration and building the community, but we didn't talk about really what makes a person tick. So we talked about how we're influenced by what happens on the news or by politics. So that could be kind of one emotion. What emotions really make a person move forward and do things?
Well, uh, the the thing that I've, as a coach, as a leader, as a salesperson, all of those, all of those people, all of those roles that I played, they're all about changing somebody's behavior. And so you have to understand what's making that behavior in the first place, what's driving it. And there's a lot of different ways of talking about it, but the one that I found was the most powerful is that every person has a sense of who they are. I am I am a great guy. I'm strong. I'm whatever the thing is, right? Uh, and whatever their idea of who they are, they will do absolutely anything to protect and validate that. They will. A lot of times we have false senses of identity. We've manufactured a sense of identity of who we are, which is just a fabrication. But nevertheless, it's a very true statement about to ourselves. It's who we think we are. And uh, and what we will do is, we've also watched people do absolutely ridiculous things, and we wonder, how can they be so stupid? Like they're doing something that actually really hurts themselves as much as it's doing anything else, right? How can they be so stupid? Well, what they're doing, it's really easy to understand this when you look through this lens. What they're doing is either validating some sense of who they are or protecting it. When somebody gets angry, what they're doing is saying, you are challenging my sense of who I am, and I am not going to stand for that. I am going to show you that I am who I am. And uh, that's the biggest driver of behavior. And when you give people opportunity to be who they are, who they think they are, in a constructive and positive way, then they will gladly jump into that and do it.
Definitely, and I like the story there. There's another good one there. Uh, in the 10 years since you had the idea and got Happy Community Builders going, how many communities are you in now?
Wow. Quite a few. So, so we've worked with communities in the United States. I'm in Canada. I'm in a little place called Nova Scotia, Canada. And it's like one of your states in Canada, but it's a very small one, like, I don't know, a Rhode Island or something. Uh, and so we've worked with communities in the United States, many communities in Nova Scotia, of course, communities in another state in Canada, in Ontario. We've worked with communities in India, and we've worked with communities in Uganda, um, and we've done a little bit of work with communities in Scotland and Wales. Uh, so we've
You spread your
we've
wings
reached.
everywhere.
Well, my theory is that, so what makes a culture? Uh, and right now we have a sick culture because we've got a culture where community is undervalued. Um, and why is that? Because the community next to us is also thinking the same kind of way, and the community next to them is thinking the same kind of way. Uh, and my theory is that if we can get enough communities everywhere believing in themselves that they actually, it is important to know who you are, know who your neighbors are, and have a sense of belonging and provide a sense of belonging to the other people around you, and actually look out for each other. If we can have enough of those, it will become normalized. And hey, that's the way we should be, just like it was back in the 70s, as you were talking about. And so one of the sad statistics that exists right now is in the United States, 75% of Americans do not know their neighbor. They have no relationship at all with their next door neighbor.
I
It's pretty
believe.
sad.
Yeah, a lot of, like we talked earlier, a lot of people stay behind them shut doors and worry about me and not the we. So that
Yeah.
hurts a lot of things. And
And why is that?
uh,
Well, it's the reason that is because we've developed this culture over the last 40 years, which is that is a normal, reasonable way to behave, except it's not. So the goal of the Happy Community Builders is to help shift that culture around, be part of the process. We're not the only ones working on this by any means, but being part of the process for shifting that culture so that that isn't normal, that's abnormal, uh, and that's the goal. And so the way that we can do that is by as many people out there who are working on communities, working in their communities, who can be part of the Happy Community Builders and lend their knowledge and expertise and be part of the voice for change, the better, the more effective we're going to be at shifting that culture.
awesome. Barry, how does someone get in contact with you to learn more about Happy Community Builders or even join in and be part of the team?
Well, the easiest way is just go to happycommunitybuilders.com. That's the simplest way.
And
Uh,
all the
it's
contact information is there.
absolutely happycommunitybuilders.com. Uh, yeah. Or if they wanted, they could find me on LinkedIn, Barry Braun, Braun like the razor, Braun, and they can find me there. And I'm glad to pick up the conversation with them.
Awesome, Barry. Thanks again for taking some of your time to join us and share your information with the Misfit Nation.
Well, great, great, Rich, and I hope Misfit Nation doesn't stay as an acronym for, for. Hopefully, it becomes more of the Fit Nations. That would be my goal. But
Thank you.
I love the spirit of it. Thank you very much.
All right. Have a good night.